for this important conversation. To begin, please join me in acknowledging that our event today is focused on the people and communities who have made their homes here in the Puget Sound region, an area on the unceded land of the Coast Salish peoples, past, present, and future generations. This land lies along the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Duwamish, Puyallup, Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. May we strive to build a community that honors the Indigenous ancestors and current caretakers of this region and its people. And may we work to protect the rights and dignity of all. I'm Debbie Lacey. I get the honor of emceeing today's event. I'm with Eastside for All, which is a race and social justice advocacy nonprofit based in East King County. I want to especially thank Katie Wilson with Stay Housed, Stay Healthy and the Transit Writers Union, and to our event program helpers and speakers who come from some of our key partner organizations, including Eastside Legal Assistance Program, Washington Low Income Housing Alliance, Solid Ground, and the Housing Justice Project. This event is co-sponsored by the Stay Housed, Stay Healthy initiative, Eastside for All, and Eastside Renters in Crisis. These are just incredible networks of organizations and community groups who are combining their knowledge, skills, and advocacy efforts to promote housing stability and protections to keep people housed. I'd like to again invite the members of these coalitions to please put your website info into the chat. And please, individual participants, continue to introduce yourself there as well. There are so many groups and organizations, it's incredible. I sincerely hope I didn't inadvertently leave anyone out of slides. All right, Katie, we can take those slides down, I believe, and continue posting information in the chat. Tonight, I want to say, we're coming together at a time when many in our community are experiencing relief as more and more people get vaccinated and as more parts of our community open up. But unfortunately, many of our neighbors are heading into the summer, not with optimism and excitement, but with fear and dread about what will happen when the statewide eviction moratorium ends, currently slated for June 30th. We have a panel of local experts and advocates and a virtual room full of people who care deeply about this topic. Some of you are personally impacted as renters yourselves. Some provide rental assistance, legal support, and other resources to community members. Some of you advocate for the policies and practices that create systems change. And others here in leadership positions are tasked with shaping policies, stewarding public funds, and being responsive to the constituents. Some of you have more than one of those roles that you have. So whatever you bring to this space and this topic, thank you. And I have a request as you listen and participate. First, think of who in your circle isn't here but may benefit from the information. Please share what you learn with at least one other person. This event is being recorded, as we said, and you'll receive materials throughout the event that you can pass along. Secondly, as we draw from the collective wisdom here, acknowledging the good work that's been done and working together on meaningful ways to fill the gaps that remain, please consider your own influence and potential commitments each time you offer a suggestion or a call to action. What part, however seemingly small, might you play in moving us forward as a community? Maybe it's sharing this information with at least one other person, or being willing to tell your story and share your needs with your city council, or sponsor legislation in your municipality that will not only mitigate the current crisis, but address long-time gaps fueled by systemic inequities and the persistent structural racism. What's possible on the other side of this crisis? Let's not miss this extraordinary opportunity to prioritize the needs and voices of the people most impacted, who are closest to the problems that have deep roots here. As I look around this room, if any group can make a difference, it's us here in this moment. Speaking of making a difference, it's my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Michelle Thomas. Michelle is the Director of Policy and Advocacy for the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance. Her work on state level public policy began when she was an organizer with the Tenants Union of Washington State, another one of our partners, where she volunteered and worked until 2009. Michelle has spent over 15 years working to advance tenant protections, affordable housing, and homelessness protections. Michelle, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this incredible organization you're all pulling together. I'm really excited for the work that you're doing and for what it's going to mean for tenants throughout King County and hopefully beyond King County throughout Washington State. Again, I'm Michelle Thomas. My pronouns are she, her. And we have a quick 5 minutes to give you as thorough update as possible on what happened this legislative session in terms of tenant protections. But I want to start by just providing a tiny bit of context that tenant protections remain a really difficult area of law to make progress on at the state level. There's many reasons for this, and we have steadily been making advancements each year. I started working on state level tenant protections actually about 17 years ago, and things have changed a lot. Lawmakers literally way back then told me that they didn't want to talk to me because tenants don't vote. But now we have a much stronger movement, and lawmakers are increasingly being elected who are making commitments to support and prioritize tenant protections. And we are joined by one of those most incredible lawmakers, Representative Nicole Macri, here tonight too, who's going to speak after me. So this session saw a lot of progress on tenant protections and homelessness protections. In terms of tenant protections, we're going to get into those a little bit in a few seconds. You're going to notice that they're not entirely perfect and that they're deeply nuanced. That again reflects the tough legislative environment that we face in Olympia, but also the hard work to make sure that when we were forced to take amendments and make concessions, that they were done in a manner that still afforded necessary protections. So do we have the PowerPoint available, Katie, that I sent? If y'all can bear with me, I thought it would be helpful to use a PowerPoint real quick to provide as much nuanced information as possible in the short few minutes we have. So quickly, what was passed? House Bill 1236 by Representative Macri and Senate Bill 5160 by Senator Couderer passed the legislature and have already been signed into law. They had emergency clauses, so they're already in effect. So what does this mean? This means that 20-day no-cause notices are no longer allowed in Washington state. And we are also the first state in the country to implement a statewide right to counsel. Because we won't have time to get deeply into the weeds of these extremely large and thorough bills, I want to note from the offset that the Housing Alliance will be doing a webinar next Friday, May 28th, from 12:30 to 2 o'clock. And that's the opportunity to get deeply into the weeds on these bills. And you are all invited to attend. The last slide we have will have information on how to register for that. But I am going to try to go into the weeds a little bit to give you a thorough update, because you're going to be talking about in next steps of this meeting today about what we can do at the local level to enhance what we've passed at the state level, where we can fill the gaps and where we can add additional protections. So next slide, please. So the statewide eviction moratorium, as was already noted, is still in effect. I want to clarify that it supersedes these bills until it expires, and until it expires, no evictions for non-payment are allowed in Washington state. But as stated, it expires at the end of June, and I will say that it must be extended. And I'm just going to note, there's somebody who's doing dishes, I think, right now. So if you could all mute, that'll be helpful, especially because this is being recorded. Okay, but anyhow, the eviction moratorium is in effect and until the end of June, but it must be extended. We're going to talk a little bit more about this in a second, but there is a significant protection gap. The protections we put in place are really important, but they're not all in place right away. And until these protections are in place, we must have the statewide eviction moratorium extended. Obviously, that's an area that local jurisdictions can weigh in as well by creating local eviction moratoriums to at least protect the renters in your city jurisdictions. Next slide, please. So once the moratorium is expired, the eviction process in Washington state is going to look very different. Most importantly, all tenants are now, as I've said, protected by just cause, meaning that landlords are required to have at least one of the reasons outlined under the new law to evict or to terminate a tenancy, and they are required in most cases to provide much more than the 20-day notices currently allowed under state law. Also, the landlords will be required to provide tenants with a reasonable payment plan. If any arrears were accrued, any back rent was not paid between March 1st, 2020, and either 6 months after the expiration of the moratorium or 6 months after the state of emergency expires, whichever is longer. Additionally, there are mediation requirements in many counties that will be required to be offered to a tenant if that county is participating in the eviction resolution pilot program in King County. I know most of you are from King County. King County is one of the counties that is participating in that. Again, though, local ordinances can and should fill any gaps and protections. All right, next slide, please. So one of the big victories this session was, again, the statewide right to counsel. And again, we're the first state in the country to implement it. What does it mean? So it means that tenants who qualify will be provided an attorney if they face an eviction. Who qualifies? Tenants at or below, earning at or below 200% of the federal poverty line, or who otherwise qualify for certain public assistance programs such as TANF or SSI. How will it work? Well, landlords will be required to use official eviction forms, so 14-day pay or vacate notices and summons and complaints to eviction court that has information to tenants that they may qualify for the right to counsel. And it will contain information on a statewide toll-free eviction defense screening hotline. That hotline will be up and running on July 1st. And it's being run by the Northwest Justice Project. And that phone number will be on all these forms. But when will it be implemented? So this is the catch. The state budget, and again, due to largely leadership of Representative Macri and others like Senator Robinson and Senator Kuderer, fully funded the right to counsel statewide starting July 1st. However, it is a big task to get it underway. Advocates, public assistance attorneys, the Office of Civil Legal Aid are working really hard to get it into place. Technically, the bill doesn't require it to be in place until next year. 50 attorneys have to be hired. The goal is to get it into place much sooner than next year. The updated target date that I received today from OCLA, the Office of Civil Legal Aid, is that it will be in place in most places in the state by October 1st. And fully implemented no later than December 31st. Again, note to that gap though, right? The eviction moratorium expires June 30th. This may not be into place fully in the state until July 31st. So the eviction moratorium must be extended until the right to counsel is in place, and also until all the rental assistance that also was secured through federal investments and through new state laws are in place and out the door and being utilized. Next slide, please. Oh, one quick note though, Seattle, as many of you will know, also implemented recently a right to counsel that has greater eligibility. The eligibility for Seattle is for any tenant, regardless of their income, who is named in an eviction detainer lawsuit, unlawful detainer lawsuit, and who is unable to pay for an attorney. So that's perhaps a model ordinance that other jurisdictions can look at to expand eligibility for this critical protection. All right, so just cause, and again, this is House Bill 1236, and really special thanks to the incredible work of Representative Macri over the years to get this passed. It's been a long journey. When we finally were able to pass it this year, there's a lot of nuance to this bill. It was a very dramatic process. Many of you who saw or watched it closely will have seen that it was many, many hours of debate on the floor of both the House and the Senate. And again, we're hosting a webinar on next Friday to go through the details. But the big takeaways that you need to know is that what the bill does in total is says that landlords must have a good cause or just cause reason that is in compliance with the state law in order to evict or terminate a tenancy. And in most cases, almost all cases, they need to provide now much more than 20 days notice to terminate the tenancy. Why is this so important? Well, it's important obviously because it limits the reasons a landlord can terminate tenancy, which helps protect tenants against discriminatory evictions and retaliatory evictions, but it also provides tenants with an opportunity to fight the eviction in court if they are not guilty of what is being asserted, or if the just cause provided is provided under a false pretext. This is a game changer for tenants in Washington state. Most tenants do not have local ordinances that protect them. I will note that Seattle's loophole that was replicated in Berrien's ordinance, which allows landlords to circumvent fixed term leases, circumvent just cause with fixed term leases created a really massive problem at the state level. And a lot of the compromises you'll see in this bill were due to that existence of that loophole that landlords got used to and wanted to continue to be able to take advantage of at the state level. We do not have time to get into the details of all the reasons. There's 17 reasons a landlord can evict. Many of them are the standard reasons. Many of them duplicate what is already at the local level with in Seattle, Auburn, Burien, and Federal Way that allow landlords to terminate. So they'll look familiar, but they are nuanced. And again, on the 28th, we'll get more into the details. So if you could go ahead and advance to the very last slide, please. So just important, a quick note on other additional protections that were won this session. Landlords may not charge or impose late fees on other charges for any tenant for the non-payment of rent that became due between March 1st, 2020 and the 6 months following the expiration of the eviction moratorium. Landlords are prohibited from reporting to prospective landlords that a tenant was unable to pay rent or was evicted due to non-payment of rent that accrued during the moratorium or during the pandemic rather. A landlord can't take an adverse action based on the prospective tenant's non-payment of rent. And this is a little in the weeds, but for those of you who've been evicted or who are attorneys will understand the importance of this, that landlords are no longer able to limit a tenant's access to court by requiring tenants to pay their alleged arrears into the court registry in order to be able to afford their rights to an eviction process where they get to make their case. That is repealed. So a lot more details are important for those of you who really want to understand how you are protected, how perhaps the clients you work with are protected or the tenants you're going to represent are protected. I really encourage you to sign up for our webinar. If I will send Katie the link so that you can get that in your email and sign up. If you sign up and are not able to attend, it will be recorded, so you'll have access to it. Also, of course, the Housing Justice Project is an incredible resource, and the Tenant Union of Washington State. A lesser known resource that's critical is washingtonlawhelp.org. They are, that's run by the Northwest Justice Project, and it has very, very helpful and important information on tenants' rights. Including on tenants' rights during the moratorium, and then what tenants' rights will look like after the moratorium is lifted. So with that, I hope that was helpful. Thank you for your work. I'm going to pass it on to Representative Macri, who is really an incredible champion in getting all of this passed this session.
Thank you for that, Michelle, and thank you for having me, everyone. Hello, I'm Nicole Macri, and I am the state representative for the 43rd Legislative District in Seattle. And it really has been my honor to work on tenant protection policy and housing justice policy over the last 5 years that I've been in the legislature. I've spent actually most of my adult life working on housing justice issues. And so I've been grateful to be able to bring that work into the legislature. And I do want to start off with just deep gratitude to Michelle Thomas and many other advocates across the state. So where I was able to introduce the bill, the reason why we really were able to see such dramatic positive movement on tenant protections in this legislative session was because of a broad coalition of advocates across the state. And that included very knowledgeable advocates who have deep understanding about this complex area of law, but also many, many people who have experienced housing instability, who have received no cause notices, who have been evicted from their housing, willing to share their stories with lawmakers. As you know, that's the only way things get done in the political context, is when we're really able to build the movement for change. And it has taken many years for us to get to where we are today. I really want to just make a note that while we've made tremendous gains this session, which will protect hundreds of thousands of people in our state, I want to set a bit of context about how high the stakes are right now for renters in our state. We have over 1 million renter households, or nearly 2.5 million people who live in rental housing in Washington state. that is nearly 40% of all residents of our state live in rental housing. I should note that for people of color, the majority of people of color in our state live in rental housing. And whereas something like 30% of white households live in rental housing, 65% of Black households and 56% of Latinx households live in rental housing. So working on tenant protection policy really is an issue of racial justice. This is a point that we really have educated lawmakers on over the last several years, because families of color, people of color are more likely to live in rental housing. It means they're more likely to be evicted. And we see that play out in the disparities of who is evicted, and when people are evicted, they are almost always likely to become homeless. That is just the fact. And so working to protect and retain housing stability for people really is a strategy to prevent homelessness. And for those of you who have experienced homelessness or have assisted someone who has been homeless, you understand just how deeply traumatizing that is and the long-term impacts that has on individuals, on families, and on communities. And so that is what really draws me to this work. And the other thing I'll say about the stakes, I don't think we've ever been in a time in our history where so many people are so vulnerable to losing their housing. We have well over 100,000 households in Washington state that are behind on rent. We have more than double that of people who are not sure how they're going to continue to pay their rent, who are paying their rent using their credit cards, borrowing from friends and family. And so upwards of 500,000 people in our state could be at risk for losing their housing if not for these protections that we have put in place. And these are not ironclad protections. There will still continue to be many people at risk, which is where I think local action comes into play. Just by the nature of the legislative session and how the legislature works, there are limits to the amount of policymaking around tenant protections that we can do in any one year. And as I said, this year is like no other in terms of the risk that many residents are under. There are strong bills around tenant protections we've been working on for years that did not progress in the legislature this session because we were working on these really big policies like Just Cause and the eviction resolution bill that Michelle went through. Issues like when tenants are not refunded their security deposit by their landlord, there's little recourse that tenants can take in that instance. And we've been working on a bill for several years to address that. But given the controversy that that surrounds tenant protection policy, given the strength of the landlord lobby in Washington state, given the number of legislators, frankly, who are small-time landlords themselves, these are difficult policies that require a lot of conversation and debate to get passed. And so taking action at the local level is essential to the movement building that we need to do to pass policies at the state level. I have a lot of local officials come to me and say, are you going to be able to pass XYZ policy? Because it's going to be hard to do at our city council, and it'd be really great if the state would just take care of that. And I just want to emphasize that this really has to be a partnership between local elected officials and state elected officials in order for us to build the full array of tenant protection. So while the bills we passed this year really are unprecedented and will bring a baseline of enormous protection for all Washington renters, they don't do everything. And there are issues specific to COVID and the challenges that renters have related to unemployment and added expenses, about not being able to go to work, having kids at home that need to be addressed, that the state policies will not fully address. And then there are ongoing issues that we continue to work on, but that we know that if we see local ordinances come into fruition, will make the work to pass statewide policy easier. I'll say, for an example, the just cause statute that we now have in Washington State, we've been working on for many years. We started to build momentum when jurisdictions outside of Seattle started to pass just cause ordinances. And we started to build momentum when then other cities started talking about, well, maybe we can do what Burien did, or Federal Way, or Auburn. And many city councils have been in long-term conversation about an array of tenant protections they might consider. There's work happening right now in Seattle, both based on the work we've done at the state level, as well as the more progressive just cause ordinances that both Federal Way and Auburn have implemented to strengthen the tenant protections in Seattle. And one thing that local cities can do is to model their policymaking off of other cities' policymaking. And so this fixed term lease loophole, meaning that you can end a tenancy at the end of the lease without giving a just cause, is an issue that we've been working on in Seattle. Federal Way and Auburn closed that loophole. We worked at the state level to do that. However, due to the legislative process and amendments that occurred on the floor of the Senate, we have some exceptions to the just cause protections. It is not as big of an exception as the previous law in Seattle, but it says that in some instances, if tenants have consecutive leases of 6 months or longer, a landlord can end the tenancy with 60 days notice without giving a cause. Now, that's much better than the previous 20-day no cause notice, or as it currently stands, as it previously stood in Washington State, that at the end of the lease, assume your tenancy is over unless your landlord tells you that it's not. So we have stronger protections now, but they can go further. Most jurisdictions around the country that have just cause ordinances or just cause statutes, statewide statutes, include protections at the end of a fixed term lease. And so that there's an opportunity to do that work. There's conversation happening in Seattle about that, modeling after more what the ordinances in Federal Way and Auburn look like. There's lots of work around fees, move-in fees, late fees, et cetera, that can be taken. There are the ability to do local policy making on fees is not preempted by state law. Many folks talk to me about the preemption around rent regulation, that local cities are preempted by the state from regulating rents. There has been work in some cities around fee limitations, and so there's work that can happen there. And fees can be incredibly burdensome to tenants, as you might assume. So, as with any legislative process, I would say in the state legislature, there are many twists and turns, and the drama in the policymaking around landlord-tenant bills can be quite high. And so often you'll see things in the statute and say, well, why was that put in? And there must have been a very considered reason for why that element of the law is there. And don't assume that, because sometimes amendments are taken on the floor. There's really there's not a deliberative process related to the consideration of those amendments. Sometimes those amendments are taken for political reasons, rather than for really smart policy reasons. And so there are reasons and opportunities why local legislators can and should take action to use the state policy as the foundation, and to build upon that to make sure that your residents in your jurisdiction have a broader range of protection. So I'm very, very excited that you all are here and willing to embark on considerations around strengthening protections at the local level. I'll finally just say there's just lots of resource in terms of advocates, including attorneys that we're going to hear from right now, from the Housing Justice Project, from the Northwest Justice Project, and very seasoned tenant organizers and advocates, including the Washington Low-Income Housing Alliance, the Tenants Union, and Transit Writers Union, that can help cities in their policymaking. You don't need to have a robust legal department in your city to get access to just really solid advice about how to craft a local ordinance. So I just want to put that out there too, because I know not all cities have access to robust legal consultation. I know most cities do have attorneys, but it can be a complicated area of law. And I just want you to know that there are experts who are willing and able to help at the local level as well. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Debbie, so we can hear from the experts.
Thank you so much, Representative Macri. We really appreciate you being here. We could do a whole program, I think, with just you and Michelle. You're bringing a wealth of knowledge to us, and thank you for your leadership and your advocacy. I know people must have questions. Please post them in the chat. You'll also have an opportunity when we get to our breakout groups to explore these issues more in detail with a municipality or region of your choice. And to that end, we actually have a poll for you so that we can make sure we have enough breakout groups for all the folks that are here. So we're going to put up a poll, and if you could please just participate with that, and that will help us with the breakout rooms. And then we're going to continue with our panel in just a moment. So go ahead here. And what you'll do is you'll select a area, a city or a region that you would like to join the conversation of. This may not be where you live. It could just be where you're most interested in exploring this topic further. So please take a moment to do that. And I'll ask Katie when and it looks like you have the majority of folks, then we'll take this off and we'll move on. And actually, I think we can continue on as people are indicating their poll response. So let me go ahead and do that. And so at this time, please take a moment to continue doing the poll if you haven't already. And I would love to introduce the next part of our panel, which we have, we have Tran Larson, who is the Community Engagement Manager at the Housing Justice Project for the King County Bar Association. She was formerly a DV housing and legal advocate at LifeWire for 3 years. And we have Chris Lovings, the Community Engagement Manager at the Eastside Legal Assistance Program. Welcome to both, and thank you for being here.
Hi, thanks for having us. So just quickly, my pronouns are she, her. So I'm just gonna do a really quick just summary of some data that HJP has gathered from our recent report on the 2019 eviction filings. So also from 2020's point in time count showed that there was a 5% increase in homelessness in 2019. So right now we are looking at about 48,000 households within King County alone that are at risk for eviction once the moratorium lifts. So just a conservative estimate of say 2 to 3 people per household, we're looking at potentially 96 to 144,000 individuals that will be on the streets once this moratorium lifts. So the fact that our homelessness crisis keeps increasing, and we already know we don't have the infrastructure to continue this pattern, we really cannot have this eviction crisis happen. So we really, really need local jurisdictions to act sooner rather than later. Also want to mention that we've got $165 million in rental assistance funds that need to be spent. But as it's been mentioned, the programs aren't quite up and ready yet for tenants to be able to access. So it seems kind of unfair and backwards to have this money sitting here for landlords to be able to access and, get caught up, but at the same time have the moratorium lift and all these households being evicted. I do want to point out that from our data as well, a really alarming piece was South King County, just 3 cities, Auburn, Kent, and Federal Way, only make up 12.5% of all renters in the county, but were represented in 36.1% of total eviction filings. And that, I think that's alarming for a number of reasons, but especially because we know that BIPOC communities predominantly have been pushed further and further into South King County just because of gentrification and other things like that that have pushed them out of Seattle area. So that's kind of the numbers end of thing for my spiel. I will pass it along to Chris so he can talk more about policy options.
Thanks so much, Tram, and thank you all for being here today. So to kind of start out, we know that evictions is a cause in community members experiencing homelessness. We've seen how community members who get evicted in some cases just don't find housing right away. Housing, unfortunately, doesn't grow on trees. And so they go through a period of being homeless. As Representative Macri mentioned, in the state, there tends to be a higher amount of BIPOC community members who are actually renters. And kind of talking about that, a Crosscut article mentioned this. It says that the impacts of eviction are not felt evenly. Black and Latinx renters are evicted disproportionately compared to white renters. Families with children are evicted at higher rates than people without children. Poor women of color are at the highest risk of eviction in the US. If we as a region are continually saying that Black Lives Matter, if we are saying that we have these statements from our city saying that we stand for equity, we stand for Black lives, we stand for making sure that the disproportionately affected people by this pandemic, we want to take care of them, then what can we actually do as cities and municipalities? And so the Stay House, Stay Healthy Coalition has come together to provide 2 model ordinances that cities and municipalities should implement. There's a toolkit that covers these ordinances and also addresses some frequently asked questions. As many others have stated, the new state laws have set the foundation of support, but cities can and should raise the bar and address these gaps. So I'm going to cover model ordinance number 1 and 2. The first one is actually centered on emergency renter protections. It creates a defense to eviction for rental debt accrued due to pandemic-related hardship. It creates a defense to eviction if a tenant has a rental assistance application in process. It bans late fees for rent that become due during the pandemic. It requires landlords to certify that they have attempted to obtain rental assistance before filing for eviction due to unpaid rent accrued during the pandemic. It extends a moratorium on evictions through September 30th, 2021, and it allows tenants who fall behind on rent due to the pandemic to terminate a tenancy early. The second model ordinance is focused on permanent renter protections. It does the following. Rent increases must be provided between 180 and 120 days before the effective date. No increase in rent if a property is in poor condition. Move-in fees are capped at 1 month's rent and provide installment plans. Late fees are capped at $10 per month. It requires a cost to evict as specified in the agreement. The rent due date may be altered due to tenants' fixed income. Landlords may not demand a child or person with disability to be a signatory to a lease if the tenant of record is already a signatory. It bars discrimination due to immigration status and bars requirement of a social security number. And then it bans abusive, deceptive, and unfair practices in rental housing. If our goal is to keep people in their homes, we need to put these ordinances in place. That way we can keep our renters safe, help them to be more self-sufficient, and build stability in their lives. I'm going to pass it back over to Debbie.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris and Tram. Really powerful and important to name exactly what you spoke to. And I'm so glad that you're here to share that with us. At this time, I'd like to invite our final panelist for the evening, Kenmore Councilmember Karina File. she is newly elected, started her term on January 1st of this year, and was sworn in early by Washington Supreme Court Justice Mary Wu. Councilmember File is the first LGBTQ council member elected to serve on the Kenmore City Council, and we are so pleased that you're here, newly elected, and here in your one of many formal roles that you have, I'm sure. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, everyone. I'm very happy to be here tonight and very strongly in support of renters' protections and protecting our citizens and our community members who are really at higher risk of being taken advantage of. I think the supports that we can hopefully foster in the city of Kenmore, and I hope to see on the end of our agenda at the end of the month, can further some of these values. And so I'm interested to hear more tonight, and I thank you for being a guest and being welcome in this space. So thank you for all your hard work you're doing.
Thank you. Greatly appreciate you being here. And I know people will get an opportunity in just a moment to connect with you further for those of you that want to be in the Kenmore breakout group. So at this time, we want to hear more from you and get you all engaged more hyper locally, if you will. And we're